Assalamu alaikum and welcome to the 9th session of this fantastic initiative called LUMS Live. We've had 8 earlier on. If you missed on any of these sessions, find them on Facebook or YouTube. We've had some exciting conversations. Today, the topic is how relevant is business education today? And we have a panel which is full of experience and knowledge. First and foremost, we have Ms. Fatima Asad-Said. Fatima Sahiba is the Managing Director, Corporate Governance and People Solutions, Abacus, and also a LUMS alumnus. Welcome, Fatima Sahiba. Next, we have Mr. Saleem Ahmad. Saleem Sahab is the co-founder and partner, 47 Ventures. We'd like to know more about 47 Ventures. He's also a LUMS alumnus. So Saleem Sahab, a very warm welcome to you too. Next, we have Dr. Shakeel Sadiq Jajja. Shakeel Sahab is the Associate Professor, Sulaiman Dawood School of Business, LUMS. Welcome, Dr. Sahab. And last but not least, we have Dr. Alnoor Bhimani, who is the Honorary Dean, Sulaiman Dawood School of Business, LUMS. Thank you so much, all of you. Looking forward to a tremendous session. Dr. Alnoor Bhimani, if I can throw the first question at you. The world has changed. Businesses, it seems, have changed or are changing. Something, this is permanent. Some things will go back. Nobody knows. The young people today who are going to enroll for a degree, they're nervous. Do you think business education today is still relevant or will it change? What's your thought on that?
Thank you. That's a lovely question, Adil Said. I think they have a right to be nervous. They have a right to sense that there's confusion around business education today. The first business school started about 200 years ago. We've undergone at least 2 major industrial revolutions since then. And in some instances, business education has evolved more slowly than business, which has been an issue, I think. But today, if you think of a great business graduate coming out of a good business school, I think the skills have very little to do with the knowledge base that they've acquired. It has a lot more to do with the ability to look at complex situations and find solutions to those situations. Answers is not what business schools are about. It's about the process through which you find solutions. So, a candidate who's pondering whether to go to business school or not might look at a variety of issues. You might look at, for instance, what is the strength of the faculty? How long has the school been there for? What sort of courses are being offered? To what extent is there an element of experiential learning and blended learning, classroom exercises? And perhaps very importantly, but often ignored, is the corpus of the classroom. Who goes to that business school? To my mind, every single graduate that's come out of a business school, and myself, I went to one, and most of the people here on the panel have been to business school. I think that what you tend to remember the most is the interactions, the extent to which you've learned from other individuals looking at the same material as yourself and coming up with quite different responses. So my sense is those are all variables that one ought to look at. Ultimately, I think business schools is about, to a degree, developing solutions based on data, but it also has a lot to do with how do you develop solutions based on what inspired you from what you saw at the business school.
Dr. Shakeel, a somewhat similar question. वो ये है, और चूंकि मुझ पर तनकीद बहुत होती है कि अंग्रेजी बहुत बोलते हैं आप, तो मैं आपसे उर्दू बोलने की जसारत करना चाहता हूँ. वो ये है कि पिछले कुछ अरसे में कुछ ऐसी चीजें दुनिया में हुई हैं जिनका तसव्वुर भी कोई नहीं कर सकता था 6 महीने पहले. ऑयल की जो कीमत थी वो गिर गई, पूरी की पूरी दुनिया लॉकडाउन हो गई. 95% एयरलाइंस जो हैं, दे आर ग्राउंडेड. मुझे ये बताएं कि जो आज के जो नौजवान हैं जिन्होंने अब ग्रेजुएट करना है या उन्होंने भी एडमिशन लेना है, ऐसी कौन सी स्किल्स हैं जो वो बिजनेस एजुकेशन से ही हासिल कर सकते हैं और किसी तरीके से हासिल वो नहीं कर सकते. बहुत सारे ऐसे बिजनेस टाइकून्स हैं, वो तो कभी बिजनेस स्कूल नहीं गए. सो बिजनेस एजुकेशन में कौन सी स्किल्स है जो यंग नौजवान के लिए जरूरी है आइंदा आने वाले कुछ महीनों या सालों में?
Adil, this is a very interesting question because when you are selecting to go to business education or not, that's the question that you ask yourself. And I think there are 3 different types of developments that you go through when you go to a business school, and I think all of them are important. And different people have different views on them. So I think the view I like the most is that it gives you the knowledge of or the knowing part, meaning how the businesses work, the science of, for example, how to excite individuals, how to make teams, how to align teams in a goal that is good for the organization. How do you manage your digital marketing? How do you manage your supply chains? How do you manage your organizational strategy? So those are all the science part, the knowledge part. And I think, as Dr. Alnoor was earlier pointing out, that knowledge part is just one part of what you expect from a business graduate. The other part is the doing part. I think that's where he was pointing to, and I fully agree with that, that doing, the ability to do that. So you know what is right and what needs to be done in a business, but how do you go about doing it? For example, how do you lead a team? You know how to lead a team, but how do you actually do it? How do you execute the project? So from your knowledge of project management, you know that what are the best ways of managing projects, but when you actually manage projects, how do you go about them? How do you excite your members of the project team? You know that what are the best strategies of managing supply chains, but as a supply chain manager, when you go about managing your supply chain, how do you do that? How do you negotiate with your suppliers? How do you deal with the situation, for example, we are in, that your distributions are broken, your supply base are broken, and you want your supply chain functioning so that your customers for whom you are trying to deliver products and services, they are getting what they expect to get from you. So I think that's the most important skill that you develop in a business school, the doing part. And the third thing I think, which is important, and growingly it is gaining more importance in the business world and in society in general, is the being part. So being part is that your values, your belief, your approach, your attitude. For example, what do you think is right? What is wrong? What is good? What is bad? What is acceptable? What is not acceptable? And the problem, the challenge here is that all these being part elements, they are very subjective. So right or wrong would be different from individual to individual, society to society, religion to religion. And there is, as a result, no universal standard of being. So I think that's a challenge for the business schools also, and for the individuals also, that what are those values that they should be carrying, and for the business schools, that how do you inculcate those values and being part. So for example, in one family it might be okay to take loan from the bank. For another business, it might not be okay to take loan from the bank. So for a manager, it might be okay to bribe for his or her rights, but for others, it might not be okay. So you see, so that's the third element of business education. I think that it seeks to deliver to its graduates. And I think fourth thing, which is fundamental to all these three dimensions, the knowing, doing, and being part, is the thinking part. I think as an educator, as a business education institution, that's the fundamental responsibility of the institution to develop the ability to think in its graduates. And I say that because it's very important, because when you develop the ability to think, you prepare the individual to continuously update them on the knowing, doing, and being part. So they have their own inherent capability to upgrade themselves, become a better person in all dimensions as a business manager. So I think this is my sense of what a business education seeks to do and what business schools are trying to do.
Wow, that's most interesting. Fatima, I'm going to throw two connected questions at you. My first question would be, you are a LUMS alumnus, you've studied, and now you're practicing. And the company that you work for, you told us, is in 24 countries across 3 continents. So, massive operations. So my question to you would be, if you were to hire a young graduate with business education, what 1 or 2 or 3 things would you look for? What would you look for? And then the flip side would be, what is it that you've learned as a student that has helped you to reach wherever you are today?
Okay. Thank you very much. And it's wonderful to be here at this session. You see, as a student, while one goes back, I'll take the second question first. It's been quite a few years since one has been in that formal academic environment, but the philosophy should be one is a student of life. So you're constantly and continuously learning, and that's extremely important. More so in this world where everything is interconnected, where we have technology which is being leveraged to ensure knowledge is available on a global level, both at which is specific to the areas that you belong to or on a worldwide basis. So from a student perspective, I feel that it is our responsibility to continuously seek opportunities to learn. And the reason is that it's not necessary anymore that if someone has graduated in a certain discipline, their career will also be linked to that particular discipline. We don't live in that era anymore. 20, 30 years ago, unless it's a highly specialized, obviously, discipline, whether it's medicine or engineering, etc. But within that also, you have individuals changing that track midlife and saying, let's go into some other space as well. So I feel that as a student, it's been an incredible journey. And what the initial formal structured education platforms gave me was somewhere you could take off and not necessarily apply the entire knowledge. At the same time, you would apply that knowledge that is gained within educational institutions at different parts of your life, because life throws we're in that situation right now. We're in an unprecedented time. There's crisis everywhere. Every day is an evolving situation. And sometimes it puts into play certain skills and knowledge that you probably learned 10, 15 years ago, and you have to apply that. So that's a very important aspect from a student perspective. But I definitely feel that the structured education has helped me to a large extent to navigate through the journey that I've made so far in my career. The first question you mentioned was in terms of what do we look for in business graduates, right? It changes. It's an age of specialization, but it is also an age of emotional intelligence. It's an age of adaptability, creativity, critical thinking, some of the qualities that my colleagues over here have also mentioned as well. And how do you hone that and dovetail it into the formal education that has been provided? From a business education perspective, I feel that it is important for universities, the academia, to make sure that a comprehensive viewing of not just the technical disciplines is imparted, but also giving space of practical experience. Yes, experiential learning is extremely important, but also a holistic viewing of what are the other integrating perspectives in an interconnected world. For example, again, I will go back to the situation that we face on a global level right now, the COVID-19 crisis. What governments do matters. What the regulatory environment is within your country and outside matters. What the legal framework is matters. So if we just focus on a business graduate, just knowing the marketing, finance, technology, etc. disciplines, it's not enough. It has to be more holistic. It has to be more comprehensive. It also has to be sort of supported by this ability to get back on your feet the next day, or maybe a few weeks into it, and to say that was yesterday, now what do we do? And that emotional intelligence and emotional wellness is becoming increasingly important. Lastly, I feel that because we live in a world where the long term is no longer what it used to be 10, 15 years, it's now, I think the long term is 3 years. You can't really plan for anything beyond 3 years. And the short term could be as less to a quarter or 6 months, quite frankly speaking. How do you navigate through that, and what kind of structured approach can you bring to the table? I would look for individuals who have empathy, who would have creative and problem solving and critical thinking analysis. I would also look for adaptability and the resolve and resilience to make a difference.
First, I think long term is now 6 months and short term is 1 day. Those are my parameters. And I'm just kidding. Saleem Saab, help me clear this confusion here. The world, where people do multitasking, we need to know so many skills. And then there's a word which also Fatima used, specialize or specialization. I'm not sure how they coexist. What's your opinion in business degree? Is specialization an important thing or is it not an important thing? What do you think?
Assalamu alaikum, and thanks for having me here. So the one thing you learn from business education is that nothing is absolute, right? It's all relative, nothing is static, and no one size fits all. So it largely depends on what your longer term, aspirations are, what your short, long, medium term goals are, what stage of life you're in. So, I mean, to address the question on generalization versus specialization, I think generally speaking, for those, looking to create some optionality in life or merely looking to attain some level of proficiency in business tools and an accreditation as a stepping stone, a more general education may be better. For those that want to pivot to a new career, a specialization may be the answer to managing that transition. But regardless of what type of education you prefer, the requirement for core skills has evolved from the time that Fatima or I went to school. The evolution of business requires us to accentuate the course offerings or the core classes that we generally took, the evergreen classes in ethics, leadership, communication, negotiation, conflict resolution, project management, etc., to more sort of advanced statistics and coding to understand data science, and developing a deep understanding of sustainability and environmental changes impacting business. So, machines are outperforming humans at an increasingly complex cognitive tasks. And education needs to keep up with that, such that companies are able to attract and hire people that have the ability to work with both their human colleagues as well as their the machine colleagues. I'll give you a real example. I mean, in my role as a hedge fund manager in the US, you would think that my team comprised primarily of fundamental, sort of financial analysts. I would say they were only half of the team. The other two halves were a data science team that basically tried to mimic my decision making via training neural networks using machine learning. So they're all a bunch of smart statisticians and computer scientists that had no idea about finance, but innate ability and talent to synthesize vast amount of information, to distill it into something digestible and actionable. And then the other half or quarter of the team was the ESG team. So making sure we're investing responsibly in businesses that are deemed good stewards of nature. So I guess really the answer to the question, I mean, I think, functional competence keeps evolving over time. And to keep up with it, we just can't go with sort of a broad-based general education. You'll need to accentuate those skills along the way. And it really depends on where you are in your lifespan and life cycle, and where you want to accentuate your skill at what point in life. I hope that answers the question.
Dr. Alnoor, it seems like machines have or are taking over the human skill set. Of course, there has to be, a boundary to that. Machines hopefully will never replace humans. My question would be, is there any specific learning that a business degree offers that other programs don't offer, something that perhaps other programs or machines for that matter will not replace?
I think that's a lovely question. If you think of a student entering university life and picking in an area, it could be sociology, it could be psychology, it could be the sciences, it could be engineering, could be law, economics, and quantitative sort of methods and so on. I think all of those areas tend to have a conceptual frame of reference which is deeply grounded. When you move to business studies, you find that business basically draws on all these areas. A lot of academics, perhaps including here in his panel, but certainly at the business school and elsewhere, there is a sense that there is a business frame of reference which has been unraveled theoretically. I certainly don't think there is. I think that business schools have emerged from certainly from the 1950s on. It was very much sort of at that time grounded in practice. And from the 1950s on, I think a lot of academics, as business schools grew, entered the profession from those various other disciplines, and they brought in their own conceptual frames of reference. And we've now ended up, I think, with a business studies that is basically almost a Frankenstein of very many different areas put together, but how neatly you put those together, and I think Fatima and Saleem kind of alluded to this, how neatly you put those things together is what gives business education the credibility that it often has in terms of graduates coming out of good business schools. So I suppose to answer your question very specifically, if you go to a business school, then the most important thing is to understand the quality of education that you're going to get at that business school. Once you've made that choice to go to business school, then I think it becomes a marriage into interdisciplinarity at its best. And I think that this is what certainly at LUMS we want to sort of offer. So a student may be exposed, as we mentioned earlier, may be exposed to practical situations, experiential learning, blended learning in terms of online and offline and in classrooms and so on. But I think that the core of the material is going to be a fusion of a variety of different areas. And I think it's that which gives the power to the business school graduates to basically grapple with situations that others have never encountered before. And as Dr. Shakeel mentioned, the ability to tease out things that are very specific to the individual in terms of evolving into a solution. Different managers will come up with different ways of dealing with situations, and none is better than the other necessarily. Time only tells, and as was suggested, time is getting shorter in terms of how far we can see into the future. I would just sort of end that question with the idea that if you can access a wide variety of bodies of knowledge, then business education provides you with the best possible preparation to contend with things that have never been sort of presented to us and finding viable solutions to those.
Dr. Shakeel, a lot of young graduates or to-be graduates are watching this, and you had mentioned words like right and wrong and value, the difficult words to grapple with. Is there a good time to seek business education? Do you think there's a time for that? Does one have to be old enough for that? Dr. I think your mic is on mute. Dr. Shakeel, I think your mic needs to be unmuted.
Yeah. So I think the timing is important in your choice of entering into business education or not. So I would say that the best time is when you have enough experience that you can use to enhance your learning process in a business program. So I would say that have some work experience and then of doing business or working in a business, and then come to a graduate program, especially if you are planning for business degree. And I say that because when you work for a business or you work for a while, you personally go through some experiments, you make up strategies, you execute them, you see their outcomes. You see others doing the same thing. So you have seen some ideas working, some ideas not working. You have gained some sense of how business world operates, who are the main stakeholders, what do they expect from you, and how do you navigate to achieve your individual, team level, organizational goals within that landscape. So you have some sense of the business, you have some notion of what is working, what is not working, and then based on that experience, you you also identify that these are the weaknesses, these are the strengths of yourself and your organization, and where individually you would want to grow. And I hope that by having experience, you will have some unanswered questions also. And I think those unanswered questions are very important because they create a genuine desire for learning or genuine reason for inquiry. So I think having that mindset of inquisitiveness, having some sense of how things are working, having some notion of this will work, this will not work, having understood your strengths and weaknesses and where you want to work on, makes you ready to enter into a business program. So therefore, I would say that those who think that they have experience and of a number of years, so therefore they don't need a business education. I think those are the ones who are the best candidates for business education for themselves and also for educating others like them who will be becoming part of that group. So how business then, a typical business class would work is that each classroom will have maybe, on average 10 years of experience in a graduate program, or 4 years of experience in MBA. So what they would do is each one of them will bring on their own experiences. They would challenge each other's ideas. They will pose more questions. And then as a business institution or educational institution, our role will be to ask them the right questions and help them find answers for those questions. So I think that's how you should look at the timing of when you should be entering in a business degree, business education.
Fatima, Dr. Shakeel mentioned, used the term unanswered questions. And these days we have so many unanswered questions, more so now than perhaps before. So my question to you would be, many business schools take the curriculum from industry case studies, for instance, but that changes over time. How important do you think that is to take real case studies and then teach that in business school or in the curriculum?
Okay, so that's a very important aspect that we need to work much more closely. The academia and the industry linkages definitely have a greater impact on not only the quality, but the content of education that is being imparted. It's all about supply and demand. So you have a set of employers where the demand is to absorb the graduates that are coming out of universities, and obviously the supply is from the academia. If there is no connect over there, or there is no relevance over there, obviously that gap will increase, thereby will not really work in favor of the students who are transiting into finding suitable opportunities, whether they are employment or whether it is setting up their own businesses. And more so right now, not only in terms of the age of disruption from a technology perspective, but also the current crisis. Definitely, it's really put a lot of pressure across all institutions, all organizations to rethink and redesign the way they are fundamentally working. One other aspect that we have to ensure that the academia puts as one of their main agenda points is understanding the demographic of the workforce that is right now the student body, which is Gen Z. And that demographic is, I think, the oldest of that generation is around 25 years of age. They're the ones who are right now looking and seeking educational experience, educational careers. These individuals are digital natives. They're already savvy. They've been born into the world of technology. For them, it's very important to be seen, to be validated through this world of technology, whether it is on a personal level or academic level. It's a very important aspect. So I feel that right now it is an ideal opportunity for universities, college, the academic sector to relook at how the content is developed, how the instruction is designed as well, what tools are being used to impart that knowledge. The other aspect, which is very closely linked to this, is the mindset of Gen Z. They are very honed into the power of collaboration. They are social entrepreneurs, just by the way they think, because they want to make a difference. That sense of purpose is very different. A global impact is the thinking. They're already thinking climate change, they're thinking food crisis, water crisis, etc. So when they go into whether it is the field of business or specialization within that, they would like to be exposed to that particular knowledge. So just linking it up to obviously the case studies, those case studies definitely give a very holistic approach towards the thought process, because you're not just thinking about what problem to solve. You're looking at an organization in a particular industry. So there's industry insight. You're also looking at how to navigate through the decision-making process. But we're also looking at providing the insight to certain situations that faced organizations at different points in time as well. How do you make that relevant for a generation which is already technology enabled? They have access to knowledge. So what becomes the real role of the educator, whether they use case studies or whether they use other experiential form of imparting that knowledge? It's essentially allowing them to experience that journey of decision making and to become effective contributors to society. So I feel that the more the academia and the industry talk to each other, the supply and demand gap would be narrowed, but it's also about understanding the demographic of who are we trying to educate. I hope that addresses the question that you posed.
Saleem Sir, Fatima mentioned Generation Z. Many of them are in my family. My son, including my nephews and nieces, they don't want a degree. They don't care about a degree anymore. They want to be YouTubers. They've already, they already have plans. Would you say that management degrees or business degrees may be losing their relevance? Is that possible? And if so, is there anything that schools, universities can do to kind of bring it back and uphold the credibility of having a degree?
Yeah, so again, there are many ways to think about it, right? I mean, your observation is spot on. Generally speaking, I'm old enough to have seen, 2 or 3 major downturns in the economy. Whenever you have a downturn in the economy, the applicant pool in terms of quality and quantity just goes through the roof for business school enrollment. So these are decisions that people defer generally when the economy is doing well, because the opportunity cost is just way too high to kind of break that world and seek learning at steep opportunity cost. And that too, in a world where that cost is actually, in some countries like France, for instance, you wouldn't suspect that, but it's outpaced GDP growth since 1980. So it's become really expensive. So the question is, what value are you driving from that education? And if you have honed in on a certain area of interest as a Gen Zer who wants to become a prolific YouTuber, this might not seem to have, immediate value. Having said that, look, I mean, business school is either 4 or 2 years, generally speaking. I think it's a worthwhile investment in, refining and sort of, fulfilling the other pieces that are necessary to exist in an ecosystem. Businesses don't exist in isolation of the broader ecosystem, and hence they require skills that are broad-based, and business education from that point of view will not lose relevance, but the education itself will have to adapt to the digital age. Now, adapting to that digital age doesn't mean plonking a couple of computers in the classroom or giving iPads to people. It's actually revolutionizing the thinking and how the pedagogy works. I think the role of the teacher will have to evolve from that of a traditional lecturer to one of a facilitator, because a lot of the knowledge is available online. I mean, in the downtime, I'm learning Python or some stuff that I hadn't done before, but you can do that on Code Academy, for instance, right? So, and then there've been prevalence of more flexible educational models that have taken root with people. I mean, in line with like co-working and co-living, there is co-learning businesses that have propped up all over the US and rest of the world, where basically the organization is curating people with similar skill sets or complementary skill sets, and curating these brunch at work brunches, so to speak, every weekend, where an advanced learning can take place, where you can ratify your ideas, where you can test and stress test your ideas, and get real live example. So you're not in a classroom reading a case study written 20 years ago. You're actually in front of an executive who's currently dealing with an issue. So the point is that business schools, like business environment, need to evolve with the changing times. And frankly, business schools can't be imparting business education if they're not catering to their stakeholders and their customers' needs, right? So it will evolve. Yeah.
Dr. Alnoor, recently, or was it recently, LUMS introduced 3 more courses. One was healthcare management, one was technology management, and one was business and public policy. Why these 3? What was the need? What drove LUMS to have these courses introduced?
That's an important question. So the business school at LUMS has been in operation for just over 3 decades. At the time, one might have looked at Pakistan's needs primarily, and it was very much in terms of general management education. I think over the past 30 years, society, of course, has evolved, as has technologies, as have economies and interactions between countries and trade. And the one thing that we find when we again look at Pakistan, what are the needs? I think various sectors have changed immensely over the past 30 years. So we look at one sector, for instance, governments, NGOs, civil society, charities. That is a huge segment of the Pakistani economy. And yet there are very, very few programs that are focused where individuals understand the specific needs of that sector, whilst also having a broad, generic outlook and understanding of business. So the master's program in business and public policy deals with just that. We kind of have one semester, which is almost a mini MBA, and then students move on to a second semester, which basically sort of delves into a variety of areas that are specific to that sector. And then we then have one course in business sort of analytics, which deals with an area which pretty much every single sector has to contend with. Following that, we then have a project, almost an internship, as it were. And so those programs, the master's programs in business and public policy, is essentially 1 year plus 1 term spent in industry with a project. So a much shorter program from the existing MBA and MBA, but very specific to an industry. If we look at another industry, then you mentioned technology management and entrepreneurship. That is the second Masters of Science that we're launching. The structure is very much the same, a mini MBA, and then a series of courses focused on technology, on science and engineering, on quantitative issues, the sorts of things that we know are going to change not just Pakistan, but the world. So digital technologies around the areas of blockchain, artificial intelligence, robotics, the Internet of Things, and business analytics is at the core of understanding new forms of digitized data that will help organizations advance in all sorts of different ways. So that master's program is basically attempting to link a new generation of technologies that are affecting businesses and preparing our graduates to basically go either into organizations that need to digitalize very quickly, or basically become associated with startups that basically reinvent the world in terms of new business models. So this is the second master's degree that we're launching. The third one, which is again a sector that we looked at very carefully in terms of employers' needs, in terms of industrial changes, and this is the healthcare sector. Of course, population, a massive, incredible sort of number of individuals in Pakistan. 2/3 are, of course, sort of under the age of 30. But you're finding that the medical needs of society in Pakistan are fast changing, and there is no body of expertise that allows individuals to understand the scale of change that's needed. So this master's program deals with just that. a mini MBA, and then a series of courses around sort of healthcare issues. So these are three areas which are sectors in Pakistani society that are crying out for expertise, which is not just focused on that sector, but also delves in sort of the business kind of expertise. And so these are the sorts of graduates that, the market tells us are in need. And so we've devised sort of these three programs, and inshallah they're launching in the fall, and I'm hoping that there'll be sort of a good set of graduates within a year and a half who are going to enter these sectors and begin to change the country and the region.
Dr. Shakeel, the idea is when graduates graduate, they're ready for the market, from classroom to real action. Which means they need to have some experience of that in classrooms. So how does one manage teaching, research with engagement with practice within the classrooms? How do you keep that balance?
This is something which is very important from the faculty standpoint, and I think the ramifications are there for the students also. And this also speaks to the question of relevance with the industry that Fatima was earlier pointing out. So you see, I think there are different views and different ways universities are organized in terms of their focus on teaching, research, and engagement with the practice. But I think the successful models have tried to create a balance between them. So what the engagement with the practice basically gives you is exposure to what is happening in the industry. You engage with them, you learn from them, you understand what are the key problems that they are facing now, and which of those problems are that possibly you can seek solutions for and perhaps advise companies on them. So I think that's engagement with the practice that basically keeps you recent, keeps you current, and keeps you relevant for the business community. And from that end, I think you get ideas that what are the research questions that you should be looking at and seeking answers for. So basically, your engagement with the industry or practice feeds into your research and tells you that these are the questions you should be working on. These are the questions that industry has already solved and you can learn from. And then how do you add to the body of knowledge that basically solves the problems of the industry. So that's the research part. And then I think having a faculty member having exposure to the industry and doing research is, I think, very well prepared for teaching. So now the faculty member is aware of what is happening in terms of knowledge development and what is happening in the industry. So that knowledge of the faculty member is current from the industry standpoint and also from the rigor and the cutting edge knowledge standpoint, and that knowledge then goes in the classroom. So while I think there is a conflicting demand on time of faculty for engagement with practice and research and teaching, I think they reinforce also, and they are aligned also. These efforts are aligned also with the overall objective of the business education. So what successful universities have done is that they ask their faculty to engage with the practice, learn from there, advise them, seek solutions for the problems, do research so that you add to the body of the knowledge, and you disseminate, which is basically the fundamental reasons of why educational institutions are created at the first place. So I think they are conflicting on time, but reinforcing also. So as a student, I say that when you're looking at a university and you are choosing an MBA or executive MBA or master's program that we are launching or other universities are launching, you look at what are their faculty members doing. Are they just teaching oriented? Are they just practice oriented? Are they just research oriented? Or what kind of combination or the orientation that school has? So I think that is informing, and that should feed into the decision of students when they are evaluating different graduate programs or undergrad programs even in the business education landscape.
Fatma, do you think there's a gap between what business schools teach and then what students or graduates, face when they go into the real world? And do you think effective management education would help bridge that gap? I think your mic is on mute.
Sorry.
There you go.
So as I mentioned earlier, and something that is coming out very strongly from this discussion as well, is that we have to evolve together as different contributors of economies and of societies as well. This is the time of collaboration. And collaboration is not just about academic and industry connect. It's also about leveraging on what other solutions are available at this point in time. I would allude to the technology companies. I would allude to the telecom providers as well, where there is interconnectivity and integration between facilitating other businesses as well. So that is an extremely important factor. And that also dovetails into a part of your question, because we are living in an age where, and according to, if you read the World Economic Forum reports as well, in 2030, the 85% of the jobs that will be available do not exist today, and we're just 10 years away. How do you prepare for a future where we are not aware of what kind of skills will be required? So if the industry is trying to plan, and even if they have business plans, as we know, the long term is quite short at this point in time, how is that information being channelized back into our education sector? And by the way, education sector is not just your college and universities. You go back and integrate it backwards all the way to the school level as well, because certain skills, fundamental skills, start at the primary and secondary school. Yes, in some cases, I would say the quality of education is far ahead in some institutions where we talk about quality education, no doubt about it, whether it is on an international level or whether it is at a national level. There are other universities who are obviously trying to revamp and close that gap. But that is the question and the fundamental priority of the education sector at this point in time, to ensure that are they really generating an output, which is their students, for where there is a demand, not today, but in 10 to 15 years time. So जब academia and industry linkages की हम बात करते हैं, उसमें एक बड़ा फैक्टर आ जाता है कि बाकी जो environment है, ecosystem जैसे build होता जा रहा है, tech companies का जैसे मैंने mention किया है, and other companies, that is already happening. I mean, you look at what is happening within Pakistan. We have a framework which the government is working on having Pakistan as one of the leading digitized economies in the world, right? So that means that some form of thinking, some form of strategy is being put into place. And that should cascade to all industries and all sectors as well. And then you say, who is the main stakeholder? Who should and who will benefit the most? And that is our next generation. So I feel that there is still a lot of work to be done. There are gaps, and we need to understand why those gaps are, because it also links up to the most important, which is human capital. Human capital capability and capacity to address these challenges as well. So that is where the conversation should be centered around collaboration, then connecting on a more holistic basis, and then creating the future, if I may use that term.
And I'm going to sneak in compassion as well. It's always good to have a little value added to that list. Saleem, I'm going to throw you in the deep end for a second. We have a friend, Abdullah Suhaib, and he has a question. If you want, you can pass it off to somebody else and ask you an easier question. Not that I will. Okay, so Abdullah Suhaib wants to know how present-day business education will evolve or address the risks generated by this COVID-19 for future robustness in businesses, supply chain mitigation, disruption, etc. In the global group. What will happen? What do you think will happen? How will we evolve after this COVID-19 crisis, and when? When? I think your mic is on mute, Saleem. Saleem, so there you go. There you go.
Yeah, so I wish I had that crystal ball. I'd be a very rich man if I did. But the reality is that, look, in rapidly evolving situations, what we need to do is to sort of, fall back on our core skills and understand, how fast we can respond by building certain collaborations and sort of global connectivity to resource, issues, resolution through competence that you might seek in different locations. So just look at the vaccine development part of the COVID response right now. Multiple different, nations are working and collaborating and sharing data. There is a case to be made that if this data and openness had been there 4 or 5 months earlier, maybe the world would have responded to the situation differently. So I think it underscores in an age where populism, tariffs, and trade wars have been very sort of, popular, and one is, hardbound to sort of think that the world is more divided, and we've already seen the peak of globalization, given the backlash that we see against different nations and so on and so forth, given this nationalistic fervor. I think what COVID has really done is underscored the importance of that global connectivity, because it sort of talks to the whole idea of finding your core competence. One country might be excellent at rapid response strategies in a controlled environment that other country might not be. So I think from that point of view, I think as far as our skills are concerned, look, education is faced with the same set of challenges as the industries it serves. And education has to evolve to cater to that. And I think if we speak a common language of skills, and do a relative upskilling, then that communication gap kind of, gets closer and makes things work faster. And for that, I think the functional skill sets that, some of these new programs that Dr. Alnoor Bhimani mentioned that LUMS is inaugurating in the fall, I think is a fantastic initiative. I think we need a broad-based, generalized, holistic education, but with very specific tools that enable people to be able to connect with the rest of the world and add value in ways that we've not seen happen before. If you look at the data of the global sort of corporations, there's a huge diversity premium. I think time and again, studies have been done that have proven the fact that more diverse the culture, the more diverse the color and look and feel and culture of the organizations, the more effective and more profitable they tend to be. Just look at the tech world. Look at the CEOs of some of the largest tech companies. And also, I think, as a student of financial history, S&P today doesn't look like it did 10 years ago, and it's not going to look the same in 10 years from now. You'll have, some of the largest corporations, will be global corporations that are not in the US, for instance. So I think that connectivity, that upskilling to a level playing field, which has now been enabled through technology, where the teacher plays the role of a facilitator in connecting the dots and helping, and holding people's hands along the way on the human touch part of it, can really accentuate that learning and skills development. And that in itself is, at the end of the day, what's required to respond to these challenges that I believe we're going to face increasingly.
So more challenges coming our way. Dr. Alnoor, we have a friend, Raza Adil, and he wants to know, economies worldwide are evolving and ever-changing, which they are, unprecedentedly, so especially after Corona crisis. How can the business degrees based on old business models and case studies prepare you for the uncharted territory? How can we do that? We don't know what the future is like next week, next month. How can the students trust the degrees which are based on something that happened 5 years ago? Well, how would you respond to that?
Okay, that's a very good question. I would ask myself the same question if I was thinking about going to a business school. I think the important thing to understand is that good business education is about looking at complex situations and saying these are potential solutions. Now, 5, 10, 15 years ago, we had very different business models. Certainly, technology, digitalization has completely sort of upended the basis of the traditional conventional models, which were, in a sense, very economistic and very sort of Western commerce oriented. I think in the past 10 years, only we've seen a shift from basically the West to the East and the South. I think that the globe is changing very, very rapidly. But that doesn't mean that old ways of looking at things and conventional lenses through which to understand the world need to be simply jettisoned, and we sort of reinvent the way in which we look at things. So certainly I think that all business models, or at least ways of teaching, provides us with a lens through which to understand the world, no matter the extent to which it changes and how rapidly it does. Having said that, that doesn't mean, and in relation to the previous question, what have we learned from this crisis so far? We've learned actually a huge number of things. I hear of businesses that are saying, we never thought we could operate in that kind of economy where everyone is working from home, but now we've just understood that we can, and we're developing new models around that. This will increase the flexibility that we give our workers. It'll increase the ways in which we engage in business. It'll increase the ways in which we can trade across economies from basically a terminal, which in fact we're doing right now. So my sense is that understanding, I think, is evolving from traditional ways of looking at things. And I don't think that business education necessarily needs to basically throw the baby out with the bathwater, given that we've invested quite a lot in traditional ways of seeing things. But by the same token, and I think that's been the sense of the conversation here, we need to move and progress very, very quickly in terms of adapting to a very different world. Technology has changed things. The notions of sustainability have completely changed the way in which we look at things. So my sense is that the world, aside from COVID, is rapidly altering. And we need to have a basis for blending traditional ways of seeing things with very new sort of forms and shapes of how we visualize the world. And I think, a business school is, of course, I'm biased, but I would say that, it's the ideal environment to expose you to the possibilities for the future, banking on what we know now, partly which is based on the past.
Well, thank you for saying that you're biased. We thought you were objective. Dr. Shakeel, one quick question from Hamza Hussain. He wants to know, how will startups survive with this current pandemic? How would you tell a young person, full of ideas, full of hope, and he suddenly or she suddenly sees this? How will startups survive? What's your take on that?
Actually, I would look at it in a very different way. So I would say that this is a time for startups to emerge. So you see, when do startups emerge? Startups emerge on the opportunities. They find opportunities, or they find problems that are still not solved. So now there are problems everywhere. Every industry, every supply chain, every service or product that was being delivered to consumers is disrupted. So opportunities everywhere. So I think this is good for the new startups. So you look at, for example, the new food delivery models are coming up, digitization efforts are going on, new online business models are speeding up. This digitalization, which was already, people were working on it in bits and pieces. Now this has speeded up. So now this change in the landscape, which has created new problems, has created new opportunities also. So I think that's how new graduates and those who are looking at it from a startup perspective, be seeing this scenario.
Mm-hmm. Fatima, you wanted to make a quick comment on ever-changing times and evolution, yes, and challenges.
Just a word out there, because my colleagues over here have already mentioned the challenges we all face together in terms of the evolving situation. But one thing I'd like to say to the student body out there, to the startups specifically, and if not the organization, the community at large, it's okay to feel not okay at this time. And it's okay to empathize with each other's situation. It is unprecedented. We don't know when this particular situation will be handled. Every day has a new challenge as well. So take a deep breath and then just reprioritize. I feel that is extremely important. It is a time for us to rethink how we respond, and why are we reacting in certain situations as well. More so for the startups, if I can just sort of lead my answer into that, because world over, even in normal times, when now they're talking about the new normal post-COVID, again, as I said, 12 to 18 months at least is key space here, time frame here. Global figures say that 20% overall success rate hota hai startups ka. And there are reasons, I don't want to go into that, but there are reasons for why they fail. Another aspect is usually most entrepreneurs start up their businesses between the age of 40 to 45, where there is the greater chance of success. So if you put this particular wrench in the, spanner in the works of COVID, it is very frightening, but there are platforms, there are forums out there, there are institutions, the ventures, what Saleem represents as well, and other networking and mentoring platforms which are helping startups, because the concept is not just about idea. I've been on certain panels where we have like the Shark Tank concept, where we have rated certain new businesses as well, where investments are going in, and also mentoring opportunities as well. Ideas are great, but that business acumen and that business perspective is missing. And that is why it leads into this business education requirement at this time. So really rethink what needs to be done, take a deep breath, and then reprioritize. That's all I wanted to say.
Okay. We are out of time, but I'm going to throw one more question at Saleem. I'm also biased like Dr. Bhimani. So my friend Imran Shams wants to know, Saleem, do you think the disruption caused by this COVID will really help Pakistan unlock its growth potential, especially in digital and technology space, and also make universities come closer to the private sector? What do you think? What do you think?
Yeah, look, the frank and honest truth is it can go either way. I mean, you'd asked me at the outset what 47 Ventures is essentially a venture capital fund that we set up 4.5 years ago to seed and cultivate ideas and the bright talent that came out of Pakistani universities. I think for any idea and to germinate and find success, there needs to be an ecosystem. That ecosystem contains talent, it contains the market that you need to serve, and it needs to be large enough, and it needs capital to fund that. I think on the capital part, there are a few private, the few venture capital funds that have been, active in the country. But still, I think we don't have ideas that have scaled or gotten commercial viability to a point where large-scale capital has started flowing into the country. So what I'm saying is that it's a chicken and egg situation, right? You create a market opportunity and a great idea, the capital flows to it, So look, to answer Shams's question, this disruption, if people can hunker down, can really sort of think creatively out of the box, and the ecosystem, supports this initiative, as we are in honest truth, trying to do as much as we can. We're doing a lot of hand-holding for our startups. We're not cutting back on investing. We're in fact investing more capital to work right now to making sure that their balance sheets have sufficient capacity to continue to feed that talent pool that would otherwise find it difficult to make ends meet.
Okay, last comment. Everybody gets 10 seconds, one word, one sentence. What would you say to a young person who is starting a business or thinking of getting a business degree? Dr. Bhimani, what would you say to that person?
Yes, okay, sorry. My sense is simply that times are very tough, but it's in the toughest of times that the best ideas emerge. I would say that for any young individual looking at business education, there couldn't be a better time to get trained in business in order to face the next 40 or 50 years.
Okay. Dr. Shakeel, what would you say to a person who's starting a business or starting a business degree?
So I would say this is a tough time, difficult time, but be hopeful. Good times will inshallah ta'ala come, and soon. And this is the time that you use for preparing yourself, retooling yourself, reskill yourself, and prepare for the good time, which will inshallah come very soon. And do take care of the people around you, because this is the time that you will remember after this time is gone, and you want to remember it as something, as a time when you did something good for others.
You always talk about character. That's good. Saleem, what would you say to that person, young person, boy or a girl, nervous?
Yeah, I think it's very simple. I think the formula is 5 things. It's intelligence, it's energy, it's resilience, it's integrity, and what you noted as compassion towards others. I mean, if you got those ingredients without the last 2, compassion and integrity, the first 3 don't matter. But if you have those 5, you'll be fine.
Compassion, integrity. Fatima, final words. Other than taking a deep breath, what would you say to that person?
Well, first is manage your emotional well-being, very important. 2, don't lose hope, because in times of crisis, there are greater opportunities that emerge. Watch out for those opportunities. And definitely make sure that you are resilient enough. Every day is a new day, and there are an immense great things that are coming our way as well.
Wonderful. And I'll let the lady have the last word. Thank you, Dr. Alnoor Bhimani, Fatima Asad, Mr. Saleem Ahmad, and Dr. Shakeel Sadiq Jajja for your time and for your information and knowledge. Thank you so much. Thank you for watching, and stay safe and stay indoors. Apna bahut khayal rakhein. Khuda Hafiz.